Good morning, and thanks for being with us today. My name is Kelly McCall. I am the Vice President of Leadership, Community, and Resource Development at Chamber RVA, and I am also the organizer of our Shared Values Program series. As many of you know, the Chamber is committed to advancing inclusive growth and making the Richmond region a great place to live, launch a career, and build a business. 2 short weeks ago, we invited Amy Liu and Rodney Sampson to kick off our Shared Values Summer Series, which was inspired by Amy's recent Brookings report on how CEOs can advance racial equity in their regional economies. We hope you've read that report, which was shared with you before today's program, and were part of the truly energizing conversation that we had together. Amy and Rodney shared Richmond data and metro rankings on key indicators of inclusive growth, incredible examples of other communities getting it right, and instructive counsel on the possibilities for us to do even more in the Richmond region. Their remarks provided concrete steps we can take right now to translate good intentions into meaningful action and powerful outcomes. Our first conversation focused on the Brookings report and shifting internal business practices. Today, I'm excited because we're going to hear about CEOs thinking differently and acting collectively to catalyze transformational community projects. It's an illustrative example of one of our key themes from the first series of events we hosted, collective impact. Our featured speakers today are working together as business leaders and also across sectors to achieve significant and lasting social change. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our board members who are participating today, our incredible community partners, and our sponsors. Today's session is made possible through the support of dozens of local organizations that are dedicated to the growth and the success of the Richmond region. And special thanks to Dominion Energy for their continued support of these conversations. Today, I'd like to particularly thank our gold sponsor, Capital One, and our silver sponsor, Virginia Commonwealth University. Let's pause for a few words from Matt Briggs, Vice President of Card Management at Capital One.
Thanks, Kelly. It's amazing to be here with so many leaders committed to this conversation. Like many of you, I have been on a personal journey and reflection to understand my role and how I can impact both racial equity and access. So just really excited to be here and to see everyone out there committing the time to this. I've spent almost 20 years at Capital One, and there's been a couple of themes that have kept me there for that long. Learning and growth has been a continued theme during that time, and also giving back and participating in the communities that we're a part of. I'd love to highlight a couple of examples. One is the Capital One Impact Initiative, which we recently announced its 5-year commitment to investing in underserved communities. More information you can find on that on our website. The other is one that's really close to my heart and is one I've had the privilege to actually build. We call it Capital One Growth Consulting, and it's really focused on taking the talents of our internal associates and teams and matching those with startups and small businesses who are hungry to make a difference, mission-driven with a focus on new majority founders. We started it in late 2019, and we've expanded it now to 3 geographies. And to date, since program inception in late 19, have committed over 1,500 hours, helped 60 companies, and engaged almost 150 associates internally. And what we've seen is not only an impact to the startups and small businesses we're able to help, but also a huge impact on the associates who engage and inspiring them to also give back to the communities they are a part of and inspiring their teams to do the same. So we've had the honor to work with a number of founders at 1717, Startup Virginia, Lighthouse, Todd Waldo, who I think I saw out there today, and Melody Short on the Black Business Opportunity Investment Study, and many, many more. So the opportunity to both give back and then tying back to the continued focus on learning and growth is one of the reasons I'm really excited to have had the opportunity to review the Brookings report and to be here today. To that end, I'd like to thank the Chamber for creating the space and focus on this critical conversation as we move forward and all learn and grow together and hopefully do a ton of good for the Richmond community.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Capital One, for all you do for our region. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tamikia Legrand, who's the Vice President for Strategy Enrollment Management at VCU.
Good morning. I want to first commend and thank Chamber RVA for hosting this lineup of esteemed speakers representing the Corporate Coalition of Chicago and the Chicago Resilience Network. In learning more about the great work that will take place here, there's one phrase that really stood out to me: act collectively and think differently. That phrase highlights the power of collective and strategic efforts to address the challenges that communities and individuals experience due to violence, poverty, and structural racism. This resonates with me because at Virginia Commonwealth University, we believe in the power and reciprocity of community. We believe in equity. And VCU is a public research university of nearly 30,000 students, which includes a nationally premier academic health system. And we enroll and graduate a diverse student body. 43% of our students are from minority populations. 1/3 are the first in their family to attend college, and 30% are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. You see, all of our students have great potential and capability, but they've not all had equal access to resources, power, or information with respect to college or life after college. That's why we focus on a holistic approach to student success that has yielded very positive results. Our 4- and 6-year graduation rates have increased over 14 points since 2012 and are now higher than the national average. Our commitment to helping students succeed is further evident in the fact that our Latinx, African American, and students from low-income background graduate at nearly the same rate as their classmates. Few universities can make such a claim. But most importantly, 17% of our students move up 2 or more income quartiles after they graduate from VCU. A student born in the lowest quartile of family incomes has a 27% chance of reaching the very top quartile after graduating. So you see, we take the business of preparing students for the future workforce very seriously. And that's why our REAL initiative, relevant, experiential, and applied learning, allows students the opportunity to turn knowledge from the classroom into action and service in industry or in the community by solving real problems. We're able to provide these learning opportunities to our students because of our collective action, working together with you, employers, community, and nonprofit organizations across all sectors. We are preparing all of our students, no matter where they start in life, the ability to positively impact their future. And since over 70% of our graduates remain in Virginia, to positively contribute to the economic vitality of our region. It is our privilege to serve as a silver sponsor for today's event, and we too look forward to participating in this critical conversation and in this great initiative with all of you.
Thank you, Tamikia. Finally, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we kick off. We are recording all of the series sessions, excuse me, and we will share them out on the Shared Values program page of our website following the conclusion of the event today. And if you have a question during the program, please submit it using the Q&A function. We will ask participant questions towards the end of the event. To get us started, I am so excited to introduce a leader that I look up to and have learned so much from. Please join me in welcoming Chamber RVA's Board Chairman, Mark Horgan, CEO of Horgan.
Thank you and good morning and welcome to our shared values conversation. And today it will be about acting collectively to support our transformational community change. Today's conversation will feature 4 leaders from the Corporate Coalition of Chicago, an emerging best practice model that is aligning companies who share a vision to significantly reduce the severe inequities in the Chicago region. The coalition focuses on initiatives where, when working together, a greater impact is possible than when organizations work alone. We'll hear details about these key initiatives today. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our panel of esteemed speakers this morning. Julia Stash, a senior advisor to the coalition and immediate past president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, one of the nation's largest philanthropies. She will be moderating our conversation today. She's joined by Deneen Pillar Jackson, founding director of the Chicago Resiliency Network. Eileen Mitchell, president of AT&T Illinois and AT&T Great Lakes States, who is also a founding member of the coalition, and Eric Patton, a senior advisor to the coalition. We'll wrap the moderated discussion with questions from each of you. So please, as Kelly said, submit those questions through the Q&A function throughout today's program. We'll collect them and then look to ask those questions at the end of this session. Now, please join me in welcoming Julia, Eileen, Deneen, and Eric.
Thank you, Mark. We are eager to share what we're doing and what we're learning. But more important, we're really eager to be part of a learning community and connected to organizations like Chamber RVA. I've taken a look at the range of your activities and it is truly impressive. And we really have a lot to learn from you. But in the constellation of business organizations in the Chicago region, the Corporate Coalition is a baby. It was launched in late 2019, actually just before the world changed, but it had an acute sense that much more was needed to be done to reduce the historic and the current racial and economic inequities in the Chicago region. Now, the animating belief is that companies need to stretch beyond their critical philanthropic contributions and really interrogate business as usual. And they need to think differently about their core business functions, about talent acquisition, employee advancement, site location, procurement, investments, and more. But really, the growing sense was that the region as a whole just cannot prosper if a huge proportion of our residents and communities are excluded from economic, social, and civic life. Now, as I said, it's early days, and it is early days for our membership. But right now, we have about 40 businesses at the table. These are either Chicago-based or national companies with a significant Chicago presence and large employers like healthcare systems. About half of them right now are actively engaged in contributing to the organization or one of the initiatives, and the others are active participants in our discussions. We also have about 10 nonprofit anchor partners that provide expertise and connection to communities, and just a small number of philanthropic partners. Now, we are so new, we're still finding our way. We're building our value proposition, and part of that will be a formal impact measurement approach. We think this is going to be critical if our goal is really to help move the needle on any of the systems and structures that actually exclude. So we're eager to grow our membership and grow the impact, but for both people and places. Now, as you've heard, our motto is think differently and act collectively, which shows how much we are actively making common cause with you. So let's go deeper. So I'm going to start out with a question and a comment for Eileen. Now, first of all, in Chicago, AT&T is an outstanding example of the first pillar of the Brookings framework. And that's individual corporations adopting internal changes to achieve racial equity and inclusive economy. But building on that, Eileen saw the power of acting collectively, the second pillar in the framework, and set the idea for the Corporate Coalition in motion. So Eileen, tell us about the origins of the Corporate Coalition. What motivated you and your colleagues to create the organization?
Well, thanks very much, Julia, for being here with us today and for that great introduction of the work of the coalition. Chicago faces many great and growing challenges, and I think many would say chief among them is gun violence. And so with an escalation in gun violence in 2017 and 2018, a number of corporate leaders, a number of corporations had started philanthropically engaging really with a collaborative that Julia, you helped lead and start up. And we started engaging each other about what are we doing to make a difference on this issue of gun violence. And as we talked about what we were doing in our individual companies and how we were philanthropically investing in programs, we got to thinking, what if the business community came together and we started acting in a collective, collaborative fashion to really make a dent on the issues facing the city of Chicago, and particularly gun violence and economic inequality. Companies were already funding critical responses to gun violence, such as the expansion of street outreach programs. But we started to ask ourselves, what can we do to address the long-term root causes of gun violence, in particular, the lack of economic opportunity for too many Chicagoans. And this was at a time too when Mayor Lightfoot was asking all of us and saying zip codes shouldn't determine the destiny for Chicagoans. And that really was a motivating factor. So in 2019, a number of us got together and started discussing ways we could address this rise in gun violence. Chase was, many companies were doing their thing. And I engaged with Chase, and we engaged with the Rush Hospital System, who were doing and implementing programs that went beyond philanthropy. And at AT&T, I just want to tell you really quickly to give you some context, we had developed a program called Believe Chicago, which was an AT&T employee initiative designed to lift lives and improve 19 neighborhoods impacted by gun violence and high unemployment. And what we asked ourselves is, how is our company and our assets uniquely situated to really lift these neighborhoods and improve lives? And through Believe Chicago, we like to think that we're working to address economic inequality by helping the residents in the neighborhoods find opportunities they deserve to succeed in education, careers, and life. And so as we were talking with other companies, we were trying to think, how can we coordinate our activities? There really wasn't a concerted effort to ask what the business community could be doing together with a focus, and this is the important part, on business investments and operations to address the severe economic inequalities in Chicago neighborhoods. And so after talking individually and collectively, we started doing workshops and focus groups and bringing companies together to really talk about what we could do. And the corporate coalition formed and ramped up its work in the beginning of 2020 with the goal of reducing inequalities, both economic and racial, across Chicago and the region's underserved neighborhoods. The goal was and continues to be supportive of the public and nonprofit sectors, many of which are doing the work, and also, but to remain business-led, focusing on what companies can do in the way we invest, operate, and govern to address inequities.
But Eileen, the timing was either serendipitous or apocalyptic, because so how did the pandemic and the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd and so many others, how did that affect the corporate coalition?
Well, that's a great question. And as I said, we started this conversation in 2019. We really hit the ground running at the beginning of 2020. And immediately we found we had to reflect and understand listen and understand and maybe act a little differently based on what was going on. But one thing we agreed to early was that we would continue to focus on taking joint action and identifying initiatives where companies working together have potential for more impact than firms working on their own. And the pandemic, which hit, as you said, right as we were ramping up, slowed down our initial work. And with the slowdown in hiring and other things, we really had to recalibrate what it was we were doing in order to stay relevant. And after the murder of George Floyd, the work, though, really accelerated as many companies, many firms were asking, what can we do beyond philanthropy to address racial inequities? And this is exactly what we were working on. And the external push helped focus our work and really helped accelerate the launch of what are now our three major initiatives: the Chicago Resiliency Network, the Corporate Connector, and the EPIC Fund. And I'm pleased to be joined by our other panelists who are really driving this work more specifically. So I know we'll talk about these later. But over the last year, more companies have been outspoken, and they seek, as we all seek to work toward a more just society, and our membership has grown. Companies are recognizing that this coalition is a tangible avenue to take action toward the public commitments to change.
So thanks for setting the stage, Eileen. But the commitment of the members is expressed through participation in and support of these distinct initiatives that Eileen mentioned. Currently 3 of them. So it was terrific to hear from Amy Lou when she actually described these 3 initiatives. But today we're going to go into greater detail. So let's start with what we call the Chicago Resiliency Network, and Deneen, the executive director. So Deneen, actually, trauma and healing and resilience, these words aren't usually associated with the world of work, but that's what the network is all about. So why is the Corporate Coalition working on these issues, and what is the role of the network?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Eileen, thank you for the wonderful introduction and overview. You as well, Julia. So the Chicago Resiliency Network was actually formed, as Eileen stated, thought about in 2019. Organizations recognize, as Eileen mentioned, that their employees who lived in neighborhoods that were traumatized by violence, they needed support. And so at the Chicago Resiliency Network, we started with our first cohort in December of 2020. I'm sorry, am I getting my, December of 2019, sorry, I'm getting our years mixed up, with 10 wonderful companies who were interested in supporting their employees. So today we talk a lot about mental health because of these extreme challenges that our world is facing. We're facing these concurrent pandemics. A statement like, how are you doing, has become a loaded question. We're experiencing things like social justice issues. We have the quick transitions to working at home and school from home. We have financial insecurities. We have food insecurities, political unrest and violence. And so many of us have had personal losses of our family members and friends. So to some degree, we have all been affected by trauma and toxic stress. And actually a trending issue now is that the next pandemic we're going to experience is that of mental health. So as we think about trauma, this impacts people not only when they're at home, but clearly when they are at work. So this can result in low energy, poor concentration, it drains productivity. It makes it difficult for those employees to engage on a team. And overall, their optimism can diminish. So this can result in them taking many days off. This can result in high turnover. So this is not good for the individual and it's not good for any business. So while trauma and toxic stress are not new, this human employers to learn and lead by adopting these trauma-informed strategies to support their workforce. This is relevant in Chicago, but of course around the country. Current employees, job candidates, and especially as we think about returning to work, all are looking at how we can support these employees, also the corporations. We also hear that the war on talent is heating up, so retaining employees is important. So our employers have employees working with them for at least 8 hours a day. So companies have a vital role in creating cultures that are supportive, that are not re-traumatizing their employees, and that are moving forward so that all can be productive. So it's vital for the success of business that overall, we're taking notice of this trauma and looking at it in a new lens. And the employers that we're working with, they recognize this, but they are also recognizing that they really don't know how to go about working on these policies and procedures and changes. And so that's where the Chicago Resiliency Network steps in. We are one response to that need, and our mission is to build more trauma-informed, healing-centered workplaces that are better for employees and better for business. And this ties to the coalition's goals to stop inequities that are occurring in the different neighborhoods of our city.
So Deneen, thank you for that overview, but if you could just get tactical for a moment, what actually does a company experience when it's in the cohort of the network? Just quickly, so people understand really what it means to work together on this problem.
Sure. As I stated, our first cohort started in December 2019. AT&T and Eileen herself actually participates in our cohort trainings. So basically, there are 3 components of the program. There is a learning component. So we partner with a wonderful organization, Kentla, that's led by the, you may know, famous Dr. Bruce Perry. He has worked with child psychology for decades, but about 10 years ago, he created an organization, Kentla, that has transferred some of those best practices that he's learned from child psychology to the workplace. And so they've worked with hundreds of companies across the country. So they're our training partner. So 2 times a month for hour-long workshops, our cohort members, and I call them champions from organizations, they participate in these trainings and we learn from our partner at Kenla. Also, as we noticed, we have wonderful corporations. So AT&T, Comcast, ComEd are a few of the big names, but we also have smaller organizations in our cohort. They have best practices on their own, as Eileen identified. So we do a lot of cross-sharing and best practice sharing amongst our group. And then at the CRN, we created some resources. So we have an assessment tool where we talk to organizations that help them identify areas where they're doing great and understanding some of the resources that they have. But we're also looking at areas where there are gaps. And so we identify those gaps, help the organizations identify priorities for them. And as a coalition, we're moving forward with some of those priorities that we see in trends. And some of the things that we're actually seeing now, particularly as employers are bringing employees back into the office, we need to retrain managers and retrain senior managers so that they are accommodating to this time that we have now. Two are employee assistance programs. A lot of organizations have employee assistance programs with great resources, but they see that there are a low percentage of employees that are using them. So how do you change how you're communicating what those services offer and eliminating some of the stigma that can occur? And so right now, we're a couple of classes away from our first cohort ending. And so it's gone very well. And we're looking forward to our second cohort that's starting in September.
Well, thank you, Deneen. It's clear that the members of the Corporate Coalition were extremely concerned about the well-being of their employees and the relationship of that to, to the vitality of their business. Now, I'm going to say a few words about the EPIC Fund, and that is focused on an entirely different problem. Many neighborhoods lack the catalytic real estate development that's associated with more prosperous communities and greater opportunity for residents. Now, why is that? I mean, there are many reasons. Greater perceived risk, lending practices, a smaller cadre of Black and other people of color led developers. One thing came up again and again, and that is that there is a missing piece in the financing marketplace, equity. And that's why the name of the fund is EPIC, Equity Products for Investing in Communities. Now, what's a catalytic real estate project? Those are projects that increase the level of economic activity, they provide needed amenities and services, they spur additional growth, and they help build wealth. Now, there's plenty of debt available, but equity is very hard to come by, especially patient, flexible, risk-tolerant capital that unlocks other resources, but it makes it possible for these projects to proceed. Now, we're partnering with 3 leading community development financial institutions, and we're asking corporations to invest in a $50 million fund that will provide what we call but-for capital. We're asking corporations to think differently and be willing to make the investment from their treasury, not their foundation. And they are likely to get it back after 10 years, but without additional return. The real return is the vitality of the neighborhoods where the projects can be built. We're asking them to provide investment capital and a contribution to a loss reserve, and we expect the equity to generate up to a 5x multiplier. Now, this is managed by a leading Black-led CDFI, and the investments are for both nonprofit and for-profit developers. Now, we anticipate that the mix of the projects would be exactly what you would expect: commercial and industrial or mixed-use developments, restaurant or entertainment venues, food, grocery, community shopping services, and community facilities. Now, working with an expert consultant, we've created an illustrative portfolio, and the exercise shows, I think, what investors want to know. Is there sufficient volume to consume the fund? Will the fund actually unlock substantial resources? Will the projects drive the kind of community impact? And although the capital is at risk, is there a reasonable line of sight to returning it after 10 years? So, of course, the larger goal is to demonstrate that this type of capital should be readily available. And if it is, it really will increase the volume and the pace of catalytic projects. So we've just started to try to raise the money, and candidly, we've heard a fair amount of, we don't do this. And our answer is, yeah, we know that. And the fact that you don't do it is part of the problem, because that's business as usual. So this is where CEO prerogative to say, just do it, comes in. So we're eager to share what we learn, because this is a problem across the country, primarily affecting communities of color. Many people are grappling with this. But of course, real estate projects need more than investment capital, which was the inspiration for the Corporate Connector. So in his role as senior advisor, Eric has taken the lead on the Corporate Connector, which is all about fostering relationships between catalytic real estate projects and the corporate community. So Eric, why the Corporate Connector? What's the problem it's trying to solve?
Thanks, Julia. The overall goal of the Corporate Connector is to help jumpstart catalytic development projects, primarily in the south and west sides of Chicago, which have historically been underinvested parts of the city. I think Julia did a really nice job of defining catalytic projects. What we're looking for are projects that have benefits beyond just an attractive return for the developer. Things like providing access to jobs for community members, wealth creation opportunities, access to healthier lifestyle options, access to healthy food options, or fitness centers or other health options. And as we were looking at the landscape, we found that many of these types of development projects have similar needs in common. They don't have access to capital. They don't have access to key business partnerships that can help make them successful. And they may be lacking access to relevant technical expertise. As Julia mentioned, the EPIC Fund is being put in place to address that first issue, the access to capital. The Corporate Connector exists to address the other two issues. Many of the projects we've identified are led by community development corporations who really know the needs of the community, but don't have access to the resources available to more established commercial developers. So the ultimate goal of the Corporate Connector is to increase the likelihood of success of these projects by tapping into the skills of corporate coalition members and making connections that could result in business and partnership opportunities, and ideally developing relationships between these development projects and coalition members that can last longer than the existence of the corporate coalition.
Yeah, but how does it work?
Sure. The first thing we need to do is obviously identify projects that we want to bring into what we're calling our portfolio of projects. We have a variety of trusted sources that we use to help us tap into those projects. There are many of the CDFIs that Julia mentioned. We also work with many of the local philanthropic organizations. We also work with the city of Chicago. And what they do is to help us kind of pre-vet some of these projects. They know the projects, the types of projects that we're looking for, and they will help us identify projects that fit into that criteria, but also have a reasonable chance of success. So once we've identified projects, we communicate to our members or to our partners, what are the criteria that we're looking for? We want projects that have a significant amount of community support. As I mentioned, we're looking for projects primarily in the south and west sides of the city, but not exclusively there. But we're looking for projects that have a significant impact, that address some of the catalytic reasons for the projects to exist in the first place. And then finally, we're looking for projects that have a willingness and ability to collaborate with our organization. As a longtime consultant, I realized one of the key strengths or one of the key reasons projects are successful is because you've got a great client. And what we're looking for there are clients that have a willingness to partnership and are also in a position to get things done. So from there, once we've identified projects, brought them into our portfolio, it's our job as corporate coalition members to specifically identify what are the needs that they have. And those needs can run the gamut. It can be kind of understanding sources of capital that are out there. It can be just building a business model. So I've got this great idea, but I don't really understand what it takes to get this idea off the ground. In some cases, if you're doing a real estate project, it can just be someone who's got experience in doing that, who can tell you, these are the first 10 things you've got to do. This is how you interact with your alderman. These are the zoning rules that you need to understand. So there's a variety of issues that need to be understood. And our job then is to specifically understand what those needs are and then figure out which of our corporate coalition members are in a good position to address those leads. So once we've done that, we try and connect these projects to our corporate coalition members and define with some level of specificity what that level of assistance is going to be. Then we will work with them to get them connected in the first place, to help identify what those needs are and how the coalition member is going to need it, or I'm sorry, meet those needs, and finally track progress against those.
So just to make it real, give us just one superb example that's in the portfolio and actively engaging both the client and the provider.
Yeah, probably the easiest example is a community center that's being developed on the far south side of the city called the Salute Center. They had recently purchased an old abandoned IMCA building that was really kind of an eyesore. It had been unused for many years, and have turned it into or in the process of turning it into a multi-use property. So there's going to be a residential facility primarily for seniors. There will also be community centers. There's going to be a small business incubator, but because they're taking advantage of an old YMCA building, there are many athletic facilities existing within that YMCA building. So they wanted to take advantage of that since they already had it. But this group did not have a lot of experience in understanding what it takes to get an athletic facility or a fitness facility off the ground. So we connected them with Lakeshore Fitness, that is an established athletic facility provider, primarily in the north side of the city of Chicago, to help them understand the types of programs that they can be offering, the costs associated with those types of programs, what type of full-time resources they need to have in place to manage that facility, what they need to do in order to market this to the local residents, and then finally how they could track the success of that going forward. So that one is really getting off the ground very well, and they're looking to open later in this summer.
So these are the three current initiatives. So we're going to be happy to take some questions about them in just a minute or two. But as we grow, we are going to be looking for more ways to leverage corporate commitment, the influence and the leadership and employee enthusiasm. Right now, we're exploring a more intentional approach to sharing what individual companies are doing to address racial equity and shared prosperity, with the hope of sparking both individual and collective action. And there has been quite a bit of interest in increasing supply chain and professional services diversity. But in Chicago, several other business organizations are taking the lead on that. But the corporate coalition zeroed in on one specific segment, food service. But that was very hard hit by the pandemic and all the office closures. So we're likely to take another look at that as companies begin to bring their employees back to work. So I want to close with a couple of quick questions for Eileen. Eileen, put the corporate coalition in the context of the constellation of other CEO and business organizations in Chicago.
The corporate coalition really is additive to the current constellation, using your language. I think Chicago is really blessed with many strong and active business organizations that are committed to the vitality of our region. And the corporate coalition is just a little bit different in it's distinctive in its rich mix by being a business-led effort focusing specifically on reducing racial and economic inequities. And the intent isn't to create another thing, but rather to bring all of those other business groups and awareness to this specific work with a direct lens on the projects we just talked about around reducing racial and economic inequities. We're working together with the potential of creating greater impacts than firms working alone. And it's in tandem with the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce or the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club, which is all of the major CEOs. And all of us might have those entities may have individual programs that they're driving, but then we may be bringing forward like our three issues that they don't have the expertise or the time or the bandwidth to develop. And so their members could see a value added in joining the coalition to do this more direct, intentional look at the racial inequities and the benefit of the collaborative that, let's say, the chamber, which might be focused on policy initiatives and other economic development things more specifically, may not have the bandwidth to address more specifically, but wants to be a part of. So I view it as additive, and where the where the missions overlap, we bring them together. For instance, we went to the Chicagoland Chamber to say, we think your members would be interested in learning about the Resiliency Network. Come to our informational session. Can we cross-market our events? And then they told us for our members about programs they were running that might be also of interest. So it's really bringing that constellation into the corporate coalition is one of the goals. It's not to displace them. It's to create another avenue for this intentional focus.
So Deneen, why don't you just tell folks what the content of one aspect of the partnership with the Chicagoland Chamber is that is playing out for the benefit of businesses as they participate in the Resiliency Network?
Sure. So here in the city of Chicago, our chamber has the benefit of they've received a bank of money to support their members with training, with additional skill sets to improve their efforts to build talent within their organizations. So for organizations that are participants in the Resiliency Network, they pay a fee. From the chamber, 50% of their fee is reimbursed to them through an ETIP program that was funded by the state of Illinois. So that's a great benefit for a few of our organizations, particularly in this environment where some businesses have been impacted by the downturn because of our pandemics, but they needed this additional support to train their employees.
So Eileen, just going to ask you to bring it home for a moment as really as an incredible leader in the Chicago community. What are you learning as you personally, as a business leader, as part of a coalition? What are you learning as you push beyond philanthropy and really seek the real improvements for, your workers, customers, suppliers, and community and the city at large?
Oh, thank you, Julia. Thank you for that nice comment as well. It's a great question. And I would say this, I think, first of all, several lessons come to mind. First of all, I think we all have to listen to lead. We have to listen to understand in order to be able to act in a relevant and authentic way, in a way that really will matter for people. So first, I'd say we all need to listen to learn. And when I say that, I mean, engage your employees. Our employees and our customers are living and working in the neighborhoods that are impacted by gun violence and unemployment in the city of Chicago. They're living and working in the neighborhoods that were impacted or devastated by COVID, right? And so we went out and we need to listen as business leaders, we need to listen to their ideas. We also need to go out in the community and listen to what the community leaders have to say. And I think we have to engage each other to have that conversation, which is what we did at the beginning of the corporate coalition. What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, oh, I haven't thought about it that way. And you're comparing notes really. I think so. Listen to lead and recognizing that our employees and our customers really are on the pulse of what is happening in community and should have a voice along with the community leaders. The second, Julia, I would say is really, and this is might be difficult for some people, but it's getting proximate, as people have said. You really got to get into the neighborhoods where you want to serve. If you're really truly committed to neighborhood advancement, you got to go out and spend time in the neighborhoods. You have to understand what's happening there. That's, for instance, how we understood we needed to get smarter on trauma and trauma-informed practices and what's happening and why we joined the Resiliency Network. You got to meet with community leaders, attend listening sessions, engage in conversation, and ask questions. And as I said earlier, the residents and the community leaders, like our employees and our customers, they're living in the neighborhoods on the news in the neighborhoods we see on the news. So let's get out there and be with them and be part of the journey with them. The third I'd say is to think about ways you can inspire. And one thing I underestimated in our work at AT&T, and I see this in the other companies, is never underestimate the power of your employee enthusiasm and employee engagement. And I'm really encouraged by how our employees have taken to Believe Chicago. And frankly, the model in Chicago became, we now have a national program, 40 different cities across the globe working on Believe programs where our employees are trying to intentionally address concerns in their individual unique communities. And I think that is, I've been very inspired by the entire company then. Really, it grew grassroots up rather than top down. And I think that employee enthusiasm engagement cannot be underestimated. And then I would say, lastly, just you want to be relevant and authentic. And I think I mentioned this earlier. And really to do that, you've got to, as I said, listen, get proximate, engage your employees and customers who live and work in the areas, and then also ask others. So I learned a great deal by working with JP Morgan Chase to understand what they were doing, or to hear what the Rush system was doing. Blue Cross Blue Shield and Discover have recently made huge investments on the south side of Chicago in investing in opening headquarters. Like we opened a store in Englewood, and it's incredible the energizing impact that we can have when we share our practices. So listen to lead, get proximate, engage your employees, and inspire others by your work. Those would be the lessons I think I've learned, and that I hope we're bringing forward in all of our convenings of the corporate coalition.
So thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Deneen and Eric. This is your quick introduction to the corporate coalition. And of course, we stand ready to go a little deeper, to reveal more, and to share, and to work closely with anyone who wants to learn and make common cause with this. So let me turn it back over to Mark and to your questions. Thanks, everyone.
Terrific. Julia, Eileen, Deneen, and Eric, thank you so much for your comments. Great to hear what you're doing out there. We see several parallels. We're doing really great things here in Richmond, but it's always good to learn what the other best practices are out there. Eileen, if I could, I'm going to direct the first question to you. One of the things that you talked about was, where does this organization fit in the overall kind of ecosystem of other organizations out there? And Richmond, like many great cities, has lots of well-intentioned organizations doing great work. You use the word kind of thing complementary. How does it fit in with everybody else? You've done a great job of aligning these corporations. I'll say, who owns this initiative? Is it a coalition? Is somebody leading, and is the CEOs are backing? How are you gaining this consensus, and how is it remaining, I'll say, relevant and sustainable as you do this important work? Nobody, I think, underestimates the importance of the work, but how are you pulling this group together, and who kind of owns that, if you will?
Well, that's a great question. And we weren't sure when we started. So we started these conversations, we started the workshops and the focus groups, and we weren't sure how we were going to structure it. But right now, I would say the individual companies have committed representatives to participate in the corporate coalition that are taking it very seriously, and then bringing back the concepts to the right members of the groups, to the right people within their organizations. And with a commitment that coordinated action has promise for greater action, right? In terms of our structure, we have a team of people who are working on this, and the companies, and it's still evolving. As Julia said, we're still learning and growing and needing to pivot on this, but the companies come together. We're funding sort of an infrastructure of a team of really committed and talented professionals who are driving the work and organizing it all. And that's our corporate coalition staff, and they're led by incredibly talented professionals. And then there are members from the companies that have dedicated leaders to serve in what we call a leadership council. And that's guiding and coordinating some of the work and keeping everybody on track and accountable. And then we work among the membership to really spotlight and amplify individual work. So for instance, a recent meeting, Blue Cross Blue Shield talked about the new call center that they put in on the South Side. At our last meeting, the CEO of Discover talked about the investment they just made and the jobs that they brought to the Auburn Gresham neighborhood on the South Side. And you know what he said? The CEO of Discover said, we're getting more, our company and our employees are getting more out of our engagement in this neighborhood than we're giving to the neighborhood. That's his takeaway. And so that is kind of how it's all coming together, and how we're coordinating. And I hope, Mark, that answers your question. I would defer. Julia may have a line of sight into this that she'd like to add as well.
No, let's hear other questions. We'll have plenty of time to respond afterward if there's people who really want to learn more.
Well, that's great. And Eileen, I appreciate your comments. One of the questions that came in was how do you recognize these distinguished CEOs that you have in the Chicago area? And is this program becoming somewhat of a unique value add signature, and it certainly sounds like it is, as well as getting the ROI from their own organization by what they're getting by working in these organizations. So thank you for that as we look at that. I might turn the next question to Deneen, just because I think your resiliency network is unique. We have done a lot of great things here in Richmond, but that is not a particular area of focus. Can you give us some details about your first cohort, how you found them, kind of what's next, what's the second cohort, the kind of numbers around that, and how are you soliciting these firms? We don't have to look too far from the headlines of today and coming from the Olympics to understand the importance of mental well-being and support, and how do we do those things. You put a framework in place, which is impressive. Can you talk, maybe give us a few more numbers around that, what you see going forward?
Sure. Mark, you're exactly right. The conversation about mental health traditionally has not been a part of the employer lexicon. Traditionally, that's something that's handled with HR or through EAP programs. So kind of making it distant and away from the actual work. Also, there is a lot of regulation that is in place with privacy that may cause employers to want to step away from that topic. But as I stated during my opening, trauma is very real, even before the pandemic. And so innovative companies like, the AT&Ts of the world and the JP Morgan Chases thought about that. And that was the creation of our first cohort of 10 companies. As I shared, we have AT&T, Comcast, ComEd, Wintrust, a couple of hospital organizations. So in Chicago, Northwestern, Sinai, and Rush Hospital. Also 2 smaller organizations. So that first cohort were organizations who really didn't understand what the path was going to look like for the training, but understood that it was vital for their organizations. So like anything that's new, they're kind of stepping in, being those innovators to try, but they saw a definite need, which is why they provided the space for their employees to participate as well as the dollars. So that's our first cohort. We've learned a lot. Since then, and as I'm recruiting for our second cohort that's starting in September, the urgency is just very real. We've had our pandemic. They've seen the impact that it's had on their workforce. They understand as employees transition back to the office or back to work, that there's going to be a lot of support needed. And then that's evident by the war on talent. Employees don't want to come back to certain work conditions, and they have the upper hand about the cultures that they want to enter into. Additionally, I'm hearing and seeing that the employees of those organizations that are there are making subtle demands about cultures that they need and what would be helpful for them to be supportive. So that's driven organizations like Discover, United Airlines, Amazon, JP Morgan Chase. We have, again, some smaller organizations on the south and west sides of Chicago to participate in our second cohort, being very enthusiastic about the training because they're hearing it from the top levels of their organizations, as well as from the employees that are on site now, about the need for workplaces that are sensitive to the challenges that they have personally. So training your managers a little differently about how to interact with your employees, how to create environments where their communities that are trusted is necessary. But our organizations are also looking at their HR policies and practices to see what in those different practices are cause inequity or could cause harm, additional harm to their employees. So that's necessary as well. So we're on our second cohort. We're starting in September.
Congratulations. Yeah, it sounds very impressive. And so I think we could talk to all of you for a lot longer, but I want to squeeze one more question in because there's been a lot of interest around the EPIC fund. Obviously, what a great tool, a catalytic tool to put in place. And so Julia and Eric, maybe if the two of you could tag team this one. in Richmond, we're talking more and more about, for a long time, we've been making the business case for doing the right thing, but now it's time for action. Let's turn it into action plans. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done with this EPIC fund, and the CEOs having the prerogative to actually make it actionable. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see going forward? I can understand where you're trying to put those dollars to work. But how do you keep that going? How close are you to that $50 million raise? And regardless of the return, boy, it's really doing things that will change generational wealth for people that traditionally have not had it. And what a great thing to do. So maybe you could share a little bit more about what you're doing there.
So as I mentioned, we really are in the very, very first stages of raising the money. So we actually do not have money in the bag yet to start the process of awarding equity to projects. But I think we have a sophisticated enough case for a variety of corporate entities to respond, recognizing, of course, that different types of corporations operate under different regulatory regimes, which make it harder or easier for them to say that they will actually be willing to make an investment where the impact is the first return. And so I wish I could say that we have $30 million and we have 5 projects in the works, but we're not there yet. But I think that, as I said, I think our case is sophisticated. And of all of the initiatives, this one, I think, most directly confronts business as usual. And so I think it's still to be proven that we can actually put this missing piece in the financing marketplace into play. But I think that if we can actually have a portfolio of projects that demonstrate its utility, we will be able to say this kind of investment asset must become business as usual in the future.
Very good. Well, I want to thank each of you for the work that you are doing and for joining us today. The work that you're doing is important. What you're doing in your community is just a tremendous example of how we can all collaborate and why a collective approach has significant impact. And you can generate real results around this inclusive growth. And for us, I think it helps light a path for our leaders to continue what we are doing, but to also challenge us to think differently and act collectively as well. And so I want to thank all 4 of you for your great contributions in what you're doing. I'd also like to thank our presenting sponsor, Dominion Energy, for their steadfast support of the Chamber's Shared Values Conversations. And so please join me in welcoming Gina Elbert, Vice President, Human Resources at Dominion Energy, for a few closing remarks in this section.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists for this wonderful and enlightening discussion and for bringing that to our community. We really appreciated it, really enjoyed it, and very happy at Dominion to be part of bringing that here. We really believe as a company that we cannot thrive in a society that is not thriving. And so we see our mission as a public service entity really as very broad and including supporting those communities that we're in. We're working on doing that through diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, through supporting our HBCUs, through our extensive supplier diversity program. All of these things are connected, and our key to our success, as I said, is our community success. So I'll be brief, but I just really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for all that you're doing and for bringing that knowledge to us.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you to Dominion again for your continued support. We honestly couldn't do it without you, so thank you. And so finally, before we conclude our program today, I want to invite each of you to join us for our final series in the Shared Values Conversation with a session on August 12th at 9:30 with the Greater Washington Partnership. The Greater Washington Partnership is a civic alliance of business leaders from the Baltimore region down to Richmond. And they have recently declared that inclusion is the preeminent economic and moral opportunity of our time, and that the region that it's most inclusive will be the one that grows the fastest. And they're working to make the capital region, including Richmond, the nation's leading economic engine for inclusive growth, which will make us all a more attractive region to live in and a great magnet for talent and for business investment. So you won't want to miss this conversation. And so please register on Chamber RVA's website to join us. Thank you everyone for being here today and enjoy your day.